started with a map, not a modern one, glossy and convenient, but a folded sheet of yellowing paper I found tucked into the back of a second-hand book. The book was about railway architecture, dry and technical, the sort of thing only collectors or students would bother with. But the map was wrong. It showed the town as it might have been a century ago, the grid of streets familiar but incomplete. And running beneath it, drawn in faint pencil, was something I had never seen before. A narrow line like a vein branching from the old station and cutting beneath the hill at the edge of town. Next to it, in cramped script, someone had written a single word: passage. I asked around, of course, old friends, older neighbors, anyone who might know whether the town had ever had some kind of underground connection. Most shrugged, a few looked puzzled, and one man, a retired postal worker who'd lived here his whole life, gave me a curious smile. "There's a story," he said. "Back when the station was first built, they started a tunnel, supposed to connect to the quarry, but they never finished. Too costly, too dangerous, they sealed it up." He didn't elaborate, just shook his head and muttered, "Best it stayed that way." Naturally, that only made me more curious. I tracked down building records, photographs, even some old minutes from town council meetings. The tunnel was mentioned briefly, then forgotten, abandoned before it was even complete. But if it had been sealed, then why was it still drawn on this map? Why had someone bothered to mark it so carefully? Weeks passed. My interest became something heavier, not quite obsession, but close. I couldn't let it go. I walked the perimeter of the hill, searching for clues. Collapsed earth, stray bricks, rusted fencing, nothing. Until one damp afternoon in the scrub behind a row of disused warehouses, I found a door. It was half sunken into the hillside, metal warped with rust, chained shut but not locked. The padlock was missing, only the chain threaded loosely through its loop. It didn't look official, it looked forgotten. I stood there for a long time, listening. The air was heavy with the smell of wet leaves and iron. Nothing moved. The world seemed to be waiting for me to decide. I went back the next day with a flashlight. The door groaned open on hinges that hadn't turned in decades, and a breath of air escaped, cold, stale, thick with the mineral tang of stone. I ducked inside. At first it was unremarkable. Just a service passage, brick-lined, with a curve in the ceiling and a narrow track of stone beneath my feet. The beam of my light caught old graffiti, names, dates, crude drawings. The air smelled of damp mortar and dust. My footsteps echoed back at me, sharp and lonely. The deeper I went, the more the air seemed to press against me, like the atmosphere was thicker down there, harder to move through. I slowed my breathing. Every sound, drip of water, scuff of my shoes became amplified, exaggerated, as though the tunnel wanted me to notice how empty it was. After perhaps 50 yards, the brick gave way to rough stone. The passage narrowed, walls uneven, gouged by tools that had never finished their work. My light caught grooves, places where picks had struck again and again, then stopped. And then, further in, something stranger. The walls bore markings, shallow scratches that didn't look like tools. They ran in looping arcs, sometimes spirals, sometimes straight lines that ended abruptly. I crouched, touched one with my fingertips. The stone was smooth, polished in places, as though something had rubbed against it again and again. That was when I noticed the air moving. A draft, faint but insistent, brushing past my face and stirring the dust at my feet. Impossible. I hadn't seen any openings, no vents, no other entrances. The tunnel was supposed to be sealed. And yet, the air moved, flowing deeper in. I should have turned back then. Every sensible instinct in me screamed that something was off, but I followed it. Of course I did. The passage bent sharply, then descended. My footsteps grew quieter, swallowed by the damp. My light trembled across the walls, catching flecks of quartz, shadows that shifted as if reluctant to settle. I don't know how far I went. My watch had stopped working, the second hand frozen at 3:17, and when I pulled out my phone, its screen refused to light. The tunnel seemed to resist measurement, time itself unraveling as I pressed forward. Eventually, I reached a chamber. It wasn't large, but it felt deliberate. The walls here were smoother, the floor more level. In the center lay a pile of stones, stacked crudely, almost like a cairn. My light caught something pale between the cracks, bone perhaps, though I told myself it was wood, fragments of old scaffolding. But then I saw the carvings. The walls around the chamber were etched, every surface covered in more of those looping scratches, denser here, overlapping, like writing in a language I couldn't pass. They seemed to move when I looked at them, like the play of light made them shift, forming shapes that melted as soon as I thought I recognized them. The air pulsed, faint but rhythmic, like the chamber itself was breathing. And then I heard it. Not a voice, not exactly, but the unmistakable cadence of something spoken. A pattern in the air, too structured to be natural. It came from nowhere and everywhere, rising and falling just beneath the threshold of comprehension.
My mouth went dry. My heart stumbled in my chest. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I stood there for minutes, hours. The sound never grew clearer, never vanished. It just persisted, a presence that pressed against the inside of my skull until I thought it might crack me open. When I finally stumbled backward, my light sputtered and went out. The chamber plunged into blackness. I don't remember leaving, not really. I remember the panic, the scrape of stone against my hands as I clawed back through the tunnel, the certainty that something followed just behind me. I remember bursting into daylight, gasping, blind, the rusted door hanging open like a mouth. And then, nothing. When I came to, I was lying in the weeds, the door shut once more. The chain looped neatly through its place. My watch ticked again, showing a time nearly 5 hours later than when I'd gone in. My phone worked. The map was gone. I told myself I would never go back, that it had been a mistake, a trick of fear and darkness. But even now, weeks later, I feel it, the pressure in the air when I try to sleep, the faint draft brushing across my face in an empty room. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I hear it again, that not quite voice looping an endless waiting. I don't think the tunnel is forgotten. I think it remembers me.